At risk of getting too off track, there are two main problems with eugenics. The first, obviously, is the question of who has good or bad genes. Those in power have historically been the ones to answer that, and always to the disadvantage of those not in power. In the late 19th century, American progressives were also often eugenicists, for example. Rather than confront the systemic inequalities of racism and capitalism, they concluded poor people were poor because of genetic inferiority, noticed many poor people were black or indigenous or immigrants, and so decided those groups shouldn't be allowed to have children. And so eugenics led to forced sterilization of marginalized people, and also contributed to this little thing you may have heard of called the Holocaust. That's the first problem. Eugenics means horrific abuse against minorities, and we're all in one minority or other, whether you realize it or not. Sure, many of our differences, such as hair color or forehead width, say, might not mean anything right now, but if some pseudo-scientific grifters begin preaching eugenics again, there's no telling what arbitrary human features they might latch onto this time. The second problem is that, even if we could somehow fairly decide who is superior genetics, this wouldn't work. In the sense of increasing particular phenotypes, sure, you might succeed, but as a rule, a species is like an ecosystem. It does better with more biodiversity. We want as many sorts of people with the most diverse genes possible, not a narrower few, because you never know what ostensibly irrelevant or even harmful genes might turn out to be essential in the future. Let's say you have a population that's as genetically homogeneous as possible, and then a new disease comes along. The higher the biodiversity, the more likely that some individuals' genes will make them naturally immune to the disease. But our genetically homogeneous population doesn't have that advantage, and so is more likely to die out. This is a problem a lot of monocropping operations already face, and if you want to see something akin to eugenics in action, people have bred dogs, for example, for certain features they more or less arbitrarily declared neat. Pugs, for example, might be cute, but that cuteness was bred at the cost of breathing problems, joint diseases, and even a fatal illness named for their breed, pug dog encephalitis. Moral questions aside, why should we think humans breeding humans would work out any better? Aside from fun, the proliferation of genetic diversity is the whole advantage of sexual reproduction. It's also why you don't want a brother and sister to have kids together. They have too much DNA in common. The symptoms afflicting the high-tech call to mind less a lack of natural selection, and more the inbreeding of dynasties like the Habsburgs. Additionally, as far as I'm aware, no credible scientific study demonstrates modern medicine has had any kind of degenerative impact on the gene pool. A lot of writers don't seem to think through the implications of their fiction. Or worse.